Welcome to Whispers in the Dark, a podcast discussing tech, writing, politics, or anything interesting going on in the world. I'm your host, Miss Chrissy. And today I'd like to talk about writer's block. If you have followed me on any other social media or my videos, you probably have seen the covers of some of my books. I write science fiction and fantasy. Currently, I have over 20 books available on Amazon, most of which are short stories. But I have, I think, 6 novels at the moment. And I'm currently working to finish 2 more that I hope to have out this year, or the beginning of this year. And I've been writing since childhood. I'm a bookworm. I have always been a bookworm. I enjoy writing, and I love reading, and I was always the quiet kid who had her nose stuck in a book when I was growing up. So it made sense that I would want to write too. And during that time, I've come across writer's block just like most authors. And I found 2 reasons in my life that I have had it. The first being personal stresses, so like family trouble or marriage trouble or something like that. When that sort of thing's happening, when the stress gets too much, sometimes you have to take a step back and deal with whatever that stress is before you can move forward. In that case, it isn't necessarily writer's block. It is, perhaps the correct term would be a life block, because whatever that thing is, be it a sickness or a death in the family or a failed marriage, that is taking up all of your brain power so that you can't concentrate on much else. It'll interfere with your work, your vacations, any other plans you have, and also your creativity. In those cases, it is absolutely okay to take a step back and deal with a problem before moving forward. This has happened to me twice in my life. Both times, it happened to be not one thing attacking at once. It was several things going on in my everyday life that all happened around the same time. And so, naturally, I had to start fixing those things in order to move forward with my life and my writing. And once I got back to writing, that's when I would sometimes, still do occasionally, come across the second kind of writer's block. And that is when you're writing and you are trying to finish a specific thing, a specific story, sometimes you will find yourself drifting, find yourself embroiled in other stories, or wandering, daydreaming, unable to focus on the page in front of you. And often, at least for me, when that happens, the problem is the story. Something is wrong with the story, or I don't know where it's going, or something is boring. I've had it happen where it's boring, and some inner part of me knows this isn't okay, that something needs to happen to spice it up, or else it's not going to go anywhere. And that's that second kind of writer's block. I think that's the one I want to talk about today. I was watching a stream with not Neil Patrick. He is also a good actor and storyteller. Patrick Rothfuss, though. He streams on Twitch sometimes, and he once talked about writer's block. And he said he's never had it. That writer's block, he doesn't believe is a thing, because a plumber doesn't have plumber's block. An electrician doesn't have electrician block. They have a job and they go do it. But I've had many jobs in my life, cashier or tech support or waitress. I've done a lot of jobs, and every single job I've ever had, I absolutely have plumber's block. There are those days where you wake up and you just don't want to go to work. And sometimes you're lucky enough to have a job where you can just call in sick, or you can call in and say, I'm taking a personal day, or you take a vacation. It is absolutely fine to do those things. And sometimes creative people, artists and writers and musicians, people who tend to work for themselves alone in a room, they don't do the same type of self-care a lot of times, so they won't take a break. And I've noticed that with myself as well. When I get into the rhythm of things, I don't want to stop, because if I take a break from writing, if I stop for a day, it's harder to get back to it the next. And so that's fine. But we also have to acknowledge that sometimes you do need a break. Sometimes you need to put the book aside and spend time with your family, or go for a walk, or live a little, or take a class. Because living is also part of writing, part of the creative process. If you don't live, you don't know what to write about. And this gets back to the writer's block. If your story isn't going anywhere, it could be you don't know where to take it. So taking a break from it, working on a side project, or taking a class, or going for that walk, can help with the writing process. When I wrote my first trilogy, I accidentally wrote the trilogy. I was aiming to write a single book, my first full novel that I wanted to publish. And when I got about halfway through, I realized this isn't a book, this is a trilogy. It has 3 distinct stories within it. And so I split it up, and about 3/4 of the way through the first one, I just got stuck. And I decided I needed to take a few days away from that project, and since I already had book 2 and 3, I worked a little bit on 2 and 3. But I was always in the back of my mind thinking about book 1 and where I was stuck and how I was going to work through that problem. What were the goals? Where was she going? What did she need to do? What needed to happen to further that story? And how was it going to go from point A to point B to point C? And so I was still getting words down. I was still working on that trilogy. But I was paused on that one specific book while I worked through that problem in my head. And I think it took about a week before I had an aha moment in the shower, of all places. Don't know, most good ideas come to you in the shower. But I had this aha moment and figured out, yes, that is exactly what needs to happen. That is the piece that was missing from this story. And once I figured that out, I was able to go complete it. So I went back to the book 1, got it finished, and that finishing actually helped finish 2 and 3. It was just a cascade effect through those 3 books. Other times, it has been that I'm working on a story and it seems boring. For whatever reason, the story just seems boring, like not enough's going on. And so I've had to take a few days and think through it and say, well, what can go wrong? What can happen to these characters that things just go wrong? And I've my favorite tool is actually just opening up a separate document in OpenOffice and just start writing. Say, I am stuck on this story because I don't know XYZ, and just laying it all out. And if I just start writing, telling myself where I want to go with the story, what I want to happen, what are the next steps, sometimes that will help break free that one pivotal moment that I'm missing that makes it interesting, that solves a problem or bridges the gap between point A and point B. Because I've never been a linear person. I do not write in a linear fashion. I don't draw pictures in a linear fashion. I don't do anything in a linear way. So I will write the first chapter and some chapters in the middle and the last chapter, and I have to bridge all of those gaps in between. Somehow it works out. But it is definitely an odd way to write. It's an odd way to do anything. It's just how my mind works. But back to, you might see that nonlinear thought process when I jump into other discussions when I'm trying to talk about one thing. Anyway, back to writer's block. I think knowing that writer's block is normal is good. Maybe Patrick Rothfuss is the lucky person who never gets it. Writer's block by another name is still writer's block. Because sometimes it's you're stuck. Sometimes it's that you just don't know the words that you need to put down. Sometimes you don't know the direction the story is going in the first place. Because anybody can just pound on a keyboard and put words on a page, but actually making it make sense takes a little bit more effort. So how do you overcome writer's block when it happens? Besides going for a walk, taking a break, you have to come back to the work. For me, one of the big problems I have is jumping around between projects. I don't think in a linear fashion, therefore I will jump between projects. I try to limit myself to 2 projects, and I do pretty well with when I'm stuck on one, I'll go work on the other. When I get stuck on that one, I'll go work on the other, and just jump back and forth between the 2. I've had up to 4 at a time sometimes. That doesn't work as well because then I end up not finishing anything. But having that secondary project does help to jar loose thoughts. Another option, the best one that I know of, is to just start writing. And I don't mean about the story. I mean about everything. When you sit down and you have all of these thoughts in your head, the cat puked on the kitchen counter. The dog ate last night's meatloaf. Your husband snored too loud. The kids didn't do their homework or the dishes. Your boss was mean at work. All of these thoughts are running through your head. And sometimes just sitting down and opening up that document and starting to write, telling yourself like a journal entry, like a journal entry, what happened through the day, what is bothering you, what is happy, or what is making you happy. Putting that into writing will help dislodge them from your thought process so it can free up room for the creative process. I had to do this a lot this month because I had a lot of stuff happen. And that first kind of writer's block I talked about, where all the stress is getting to you and you just you just have to deal with it. And so I did as much as I could. I dealt with the things that I could, but it was still rattling around in my brain. When I sat down at the computer, I had to get those things out before I could start being creative. And so I would write about 5 minutes and just write anything. This technique is actually talked about in The Writer's Way. It's a book, I don't remember who wrote it, but it's called The Writer's Way, and it talks about doing daily pages, where in the morning, every morning for 5 minutes, you just write. You write about what's happening, you write about what color the sky is, or how you're feeling, or what's going on, or what you're expecting, and you just let it out for about 5 minutes. And if you run long, that's fine, but you at least try to write for 5 minutes. And it gets those things out on paper. And I've learned this when bad things happen in my life too. If you get it down on paper, if you write it down, you can let go a little. When my boyfriend broke up with me, for the first 2 weeks, I wrote him a letter every day, and I burnt the letters. I burned them, they're gone. But in order to deal with the process of grieving, because my 10-year relationship just died, I was going through a grieving process. I went through the 7 stages. Just depression and anger and bargaining and all of it. But I did it on paper to get it out of my head so that I could organize it and confront it. And this helped me process it. Through putting it on the page, I was able to let go. And then after a while, I was able to break through that 7 layers of grief, even if it was just for a little bit, and start being creative again. And each time I was creative, every time I was able to finish a chapter or get through a particularly difficult scene, it just built my confidence a little bit more and helped beat back those 7 stages of grief so that I could start living for me again instead of for the grief. Grieving's a hard one. It is absolutely a process. I think I'll talk about that in a different episode, but if you're going through grief, give yourself time to deal with it, and don't feel guilty about it, because you absolutely have to go through that roller coaster so you can go on with your life. Anyway, that's my take on writer's block. It absolutely exists. Don't feel guilty for it, but learn the reasons behind it. Look at your life, see if there's any stresses going on there. Deal with them if you have to, or write them down. Sometimes things are out of our control and we can't do anything about them. So writing it down and letting it out on the page might help. And then you can be creative again. And if it's the story, do the same. Write it down. Tell yourself what's stopping you, what's getting in the way of writing, what part isn't working. And then if you need to, step away, go think for a while, go on some walks, talk to some friends, maybe talk to some other writers. But the only way to deal with it is to acknowledge that it's there and then come back to the story in time and keep working, keep trying. The only way you fail is if you stop trying. Thank you for listening to Whispers in the Dark. If you enjoyed, please like, subscribe, and share the link. You can find my other projects linked below, including books on Amazon and various vlogs.